He divorced her for being barren. 6 months later, he saw her again, 7 months pregnant. When billionaire Alexander Kane discovers the child he was promised was never his, he begins to unravel the cruel truth of his own betrayal. Now, the woman he cast aside is carrying the child he never knew existed, and she's built a new life without him. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Daniela sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, her fingers tangled in the lace of her nightgown, staring at the marble floor beneath her bare feet. The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, golden light dancing on expensive furniture and untouched luxury. But none of it touched her. None of it mattered anymore. She turned slightly, watching Alexander as he stood by the window, dressed immaculately as always. Dark gray suit tailored to perfection, cufflinks catching the light. He looked like everything a woman might dream of, powerful, poised, devastatingly handsome. But all she could feel now was a widening void. "Daniela," his voice came, clipped and without emotion. "I've spoken to the lawyers. The papers are ready." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She stared at him, not quite able to reconcile the man before her with the one she had once loved so deeply. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of laughter, travel, heartbreak, and hope, reduced now to a handful of legal documents. You've spoken to the lawyers," she repeated quietly, as if saying it aloud would help her make sense of it. Just like that, Alexander turned toward her, his expression unreadable, eyes colder than she remembered. "We've tried, Daniela. We've been through every test, every doctor, every treatment. It's clear now. You can't give me the one thing I need." She stood slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. "The one thing you need?" Her voice cracked. "You mean a child?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, like a final verdict in a trial she didn't know she was on. Tears blurred her vision. "And what about everything else I gave you? My love, my time, my life? Does none of that matter?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm your wife, Alex," she cried. "For 5 years I stood by you. Even when your work kept you away, even when I was alone in that cold house with no one to talk to but the maids. I didn't make you barren, Daniela," he cut in sharply. "I didn't choose this. I wanted a family. You knew that." She recoiled as if he had struck her. The word barren rang in her ears, cruel and final. "But we still had time," she whispered. "We could have tried again. What happened to us fighting this together? I've made my decision." He walked toward the door, avoiding her gaze. "Vanessa is pregnant. She's giving me what I need. I want to build my future with her." The air left her lungs. Her body collapsed back onto the bed as her heart cracked open. "Vanessa," she echoed, stunned. "Your assistant?" He didn't respond. His silence said everything. She rose again, fists clenched, heart pounding in disbelief. "You were with her while we were still married." Alexander finally looked at her, and this time there was a flicker of guilt in his eyes, quickly masked. "It doesn't matter now." "It does matter," she screamed. "You threw me away like I was nothing, like all these years meant nothing to you." His face hardened once more. "You'll be well taken care of. I've ensured that." She laughed, bitter, hollow. "You think this is about money?" But he was already turning away, already reaching for the door. "I loved you, Alex," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "I would have done anything for you." He paused, hand resting on the handle. For a brief moment, he looked like he might turn around. Like he might say something, anything, that acknowledged the pain he was leaving behind. But he didn't. The door opened, then closed. And Daniela Kane, now just Daniela once more, stood alone in a house that still smelled like him. A house filled with flowers he never noticed and memories he discarded. She sank to the floor, clutching her abdomen, sobbing from a pain that no doctor had ever diagnosed. The pain of being left behind not for who she was, but for what she couldn't give. And somewhere deep inside her, the last petal of her love for Alexander withered and fell. The The city was far behind her now. Daniela's hands gripped the steering wheel of the second-hand car she'd bought with what little money she hadn't returned to Alexander. The diamond ring he once placed on her finger had been quietly sold a week after the divorce. She didn't want it. Not as a reminder, not as a keepsake. It belonged to another version of her, the version who still believed in promises. She pulled into the small coastal town of Windermere just as the afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon. It wasn't glamorous or wealthy, and it certainly wasn't what she was used to, but it had what she needed: peace. Quiet. Distance. A place to disappear and become someone new. Her apartment was modest, a one-bedroom space above a quaint bakery that smelled like cinnamon and honey every morning. The window overlooked a sleepy street with colorful shutters and uneven cobblestones. She found it comforting, imperfect but alive, unlike the sterile, magazine-worthy apartment she'd left behind. She didn't cry much anymore. There was an aching numbness in her chest, but the tears had dried on the road. What remained was a strange determination. To survive. To heal. To begin again. Daniela had always loved flowers. Even as a little girl, she would sneak into her grandmother's garden and pretend the tulips were tiny dancers in ball gowns. During her marriage, she had filled every room with vases of peonies, orchids, and lilies. Alexander rarely noticed. When he did, he complained about allergies or the mess. Now she decided they would be her salvation. She rented a stall at the town market with her last few $1,000s. It was a wooden kiosk with chipped paint and a crooked sign that read "Available for lease." She painted it soft lavender and named it Dora's Blooms, a blend of her name and her grandmother's. She spent mornings visiting the local flower farms, learning the names of every plant from cheerful old gardeners with dirt under their nails and kind eyes. She worked the stall 6 days a week, rising before dawn to arrange tulips, sunflowers, roses, and wildflowers in little bouquets wrapped in twine and brown paper. The work was humbling, grounding. Strangers smiled at her. Children pointed at the bright colors. A few elderly ladies from the neighborhood began stopping by just to chat. It was the first time in years she felt like a person, not a trophy wife, not a failed mother, not an abandoned woman. Just Daniela. But her body had felt off for weeks. The fatigue she chalked up to stress. The nausea, well, that could have been the bakery's overly sweet air. But the dizziness? The way her clothes were fitting just a bit tighter? She told herself it was all part of the stress. Until she fainted while tying a bouquet of white daisies and lavender. When she came to, a pair of concerned eyes stared down at her. "You're at Windermere Medical. You passed out at the market," the nurse said kindly. Daniela blinked up at the sterile ceiling, her mind still foggy. "I'm fine," she muttered. "Just tired." The doctor entered soon after, holding a chart. He looked at her with the kind of softness that usually preceded bad news. "Daniela, we ran a few quick tests just to make sure it wasn't anything serious," he began. She nodded slowly, bracing herself. "You're about 6 weeks pregnant." Silence. Daniela stared at him, sure she had misheard. I'm what?" "Pregnant," he repeated gently. "Congratulations." A strangled breath escaped her lips. She shook her head, disoriented. "That's not possible. I was told I couldn't conceive. We tried for years." The doctor offered a soft smile. "Sometimes the body just needs time, or peace. Stress can play a bigger role than people think. But you're healthy and the baby's heartbeat is strong." The baby. She left the clinic in a daze, clutching the ultrasound printout like a fragile miracle. Sitting on the edge of her bed that night, she stared at the black and white image, a tiny grain, a flicker of life, and something inside her cracked wide open. She wasn't alone. A flood of tears poured from her eyes, silent and uncontrollable. But they weren't tears of sorrow this time. They were of joy, disbelief, and overwhelming love. She laid her hand gently over her flat belly, as if already protecting the life growing within. "I have you now," she whispered. It wasn't revenge she felt. It wasn't even a desire to prove Alexander wrong. It was something softer, stronger, a quiet knowing that she could face whatever came next because she was no longer just surviving. She was growing life. Her life. And she would never tell him. Not out of spite, but because he didn't deserve to know. He had made his choice. He'd chosen to discard her, to call her barren and replace her without a backward glance. This child, this miracle, would not be born in the shadow of his rejection. Daniela stood, walked to her small balcony, and looked out at the sleepy lights of Windmere. She inhaled the salt-kissed air, her fingers still resting on her belly. Tomorrow, she would return to the flower stall. Tomorrow, she would begin again. Not as the woman Alexander abandoned, but as the mother of a child that fate had quietly gifted her. A bloom amidst the ruins. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet. Alexander Kane sat alone in the sprawling living room of his high-rise apartment, staring into the bottom of a crystal tumbler filled with scotch. The city skyline blinked back at him through the glass walls, but he barely saw it. It had been 4 months since the divorce was finalized. For months since Vanessa moved in. For months since he'd told himself he had everything he ever wanted. Then why did he feel nothing? He rolled the glass between his palms, jaw clenched. Vanessa's laughter echoed faintly from another room, light, flirtatious, too loud. She was always laughing lately, always on her phone, always smiling at someone who wasn't him. And he noticed. He just didn't know what to do about it. The first few weeks after Daniela left had been strangely euphoric. He was free, he told himself. Free from the constant disappointment of failed IVF appointments, from the quiet sadness in her eyes, from the tension that had turned their bedroom into a cold and foreign place. Vanessa had been exciting, young, curvy, wild-eyed with ambition and sexual confidence. She had flattered him, made him feel wanted again, told him she was pregnant, and he hadn't questioned it. He'd believed her when she'd said he'd finally be a father. Now he wasn't so sure. She came into the living room wearing a tight silk dress, pausing to admire her reflection in the mirror by the bar. Her makeup was flawless, her hair tumbling in intentional waves down her back. "You're going out again?" Alexander asked flatly. Vanessa turned, feigning surprise. "It's just a dinner, babe. With a friend." He narrowed his eyes. "Who?" She waved a manicured hand. "Just a couple of people from the art scene. You wouldn't know them. You've been going out a lot lately." Vanessa walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder, her perfume strong and sweet. "You're working all the time. I get bored. The city is full of life. I can't sit in here like some housewife." He tensed beneath her touch. "You're carrying my child." She laughed, brushing his cheek with her lips. "Exactly. I need to keep myself happy. Happy mama, happy baby." But the words felt hollow now. After she left, he sat in the darkness for a long time, the silence pressing in. Something inside him whispered what he refused to say out loud. "This doesn't feel right." He pulled out his phone. A few taps later, he was on the line with a man named Travis, his longtime private investigator. Discreet, loyal, and used to cleaning up messes for the ultra-wealthy. "I want you to look into Vanessa," he said without hesitation. There was a pause on the other end. "Something wrong, Mr. Kane?" "Just a gut feeling," Alexander replied, staring at the door she had walked through moments ago. "Check everything. Who she talks to. Where she goes. And I want a paternity test." "You got it." He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, heart heavy. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and restless nights. He stopped watching Vanessa with wonder. Now he watched her with suspicion. He noticed the texts she hid when he walked into the room. The phone calls she took in the bathroom. The man she hugged too long at a gallery opening. A man who looked too familiar with her. Then the photos arrived. Travis handed him the envelope personally, silent and grim. Alexander opened it slowly, each image driving a nail into the fantasy he had built for himself. Vanessa, laughing intimately with a man outside a private lounge. Vanessa, entering a luxury hotel late at night. Vanessa, exiting the same hotel the next morning in different clothes. And then the final blow, a lab report tucked into the file. They had planned with her doctor to get it without her knowledge. Paternity inconclusive, not a match. Alexander sat in stunned silence, the paper trembling in his hands. The words blurred, but the meaning was clear. He wasn't going to be a father. Not now. Not with her. She had lied. Used him. And in his arrogance, he'd let her. Because he was so desperate to prove he could move on, to prove he could have what Daniela couldn't give him. The betrayal hit like a slow-burning fire, not a sharp wound, but a deep, aching scorch across his soul. So this is what it feels like, he thought. To be lied to be used, to be loved for what you can give, and discarded once that value fades. He poured another drink, but it didn't taste like victory. It tasted like ash. That night, Vanessa came home humming. When he showed her the photos, she didn't cry or deny. She simply shrugged. "I was never going to be your happy ending, Alex," she said coldly. "You were just the shortcut." He didn't speak. He just turned away. When she left the next morning, suitcase in hand and no trace of remorse in her eyes, Alexander sat at the kitchen table alone. Really alone, for the first time in years. And then he thought of Daniela. How she had loved him without agenda. How she had cried when he walked away. How her hands had trembled when she begged him to stay. How he had broken her. What had he done? He pulled out his phone again. "Travis," he said, voice rough with regret. "I need you to find someone." "Who?" "Daniela Kane," he said, the name catching in his throat. "I need to find her. I don't care where she is. I need to see her again." He hung up, staring out at the city as it blurred into night. He was no longer a man chasing legacy. He was a man chasing a ghost, the woman he cast out, who once looked at him like he was enough. And somehow he had to make it right. The first thing he remembered was her eyes, the way they used to look at him. Eyes full of belief. Trust. A kind of quiet worship that never needed words. Now those eyes haunted Alexander Kane. For weeks after Vanessa left, he moved through his penthouse like a ghost. His world, once sharp, scheduled, polished, had turned murky, sluggish. The business meetings went on, his name still carried weight, his fortune still grew. But the man behind it all was unraveling. The lie had exposed more than Vanessa's betrayal. It had exposed his own. The moment he learned the child wasn't his, Alexander was struck by an unbearable truth. That he had destroyed the only woman who had ever truly loved him for who he was, not what he owned. And she was gone. But not forever. He refused to accept that. She hadn't died. She had simply left. Escaped the chaos he had become. He had to find her. "Travis," he barked into the phone late one night. "Tell me you have something." The investigator sighed. She didn't leave much of a trail. Closed her old bank account. No social media. Forwarding address was temporary. She wanted to disappear. She wouldn't have left the country, Alexander muttered. She loves small places. Quiet towns. Somewhere with flowers. There was a pause on the line. Then, actually, I've been following a trail of receipts. Cash transactions. There's a small flower stall operating out of a town called Windmere. Registered just less a month after she left. Alexander's heart stopped. Windmere. He'd heard of it. A coastal town a few hours away, known for its cottages and sleepy pace. "Send me the address," he said. Now. The drive to Windmere was long, but the silence in the car gave him time to think. He remembered her laugh. The way she used to hum when she watered plants on their balcony. The notebooks full of flower sketches and wedding bouquet ideas that she kept long after their own wedding. She'd once dreamed of opening a flower shop, and he had dismissed it as a hobby. Now he'd give up everything just to see her smile again. When he entered the town, it felt like stepping into another world. No skyscrapers. No traffic. Just cobbled streets, hand-painted signs, and the scent of salt and jasmine on the wind. He asked for directions to the flower stall. A bakery owner pointed him toward the town square, smiling knowingly. "She's a sweet girl, that one," the woman said. "Kind eyes. And glowing lately. Must be the pregnancy." Alexander froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. Pregnancy? He didn't ask questions. He just ran. And there she was. At the corner of the town square, under a lavender-painted stall with wildflowers bursting in every direction. There she stood. Daniela. Her back was to him, arranging a bundle of sunflowers for a customer, her long hair tied in a loose braid down her back. She looked beautiful, different, free, and unmistakably pregnant. The curve of her belly beneath her sundress was impossible to miss. She moved gently, like someone who had grown used to carrying new life. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. It was his. It had to be. The timeline. Her body. The bakery woman's words. She hadn't been barren. She had been carrying his child when he divorced her, when he threw her aside and accused her of being incapable of motherhood. And she had said nothing. No calls. No letters. No claims on his money or name. She had left to protect her heart and their child. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. Daniela. She turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world slowed. Her expression was unreadable at first. Just shock, like seeing a ghost in daylight. Then her gaze dropped slightly, instinctively protecting her belly. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Not the apology he had practiced. Not the plea. Not the name of the child he now desperately wanted to know. No. What came out was a broken, impulsive accusation, laced with the guilt and shame he hadn't yet processed. How dare you get pregnant and hide it from me? Daniela blinked. Slowly, as if his words had physically struck her. She let out a soft, disbelieving laugh, sharp, cold, nothing like the woman who once loved him. You don't get to say that, she said. Her voice was calm, but beneath it simmered years of betrayal. You don't get to. Daniela, I didn't know. Exactly, she cut in. You didn't know because you didn't care. You never waited. You never asked. You made up your mind and you left. I thought you couldn't. You never gave me time to even find out. Her voice rose now, raw with pain. I found out a month after you divorced me. 1 month. You had already moved on. You were engaged. You told me I was barren, Alexander. He stood still, shame wrapping around his throat like a noose. I was hurt, he murmured. I thought I was angry. I made a mistake. No, she snapped. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. What you did was betrayal. What you did was abandon me. And now you show up here, shouting in the middle of my life, as if you still have the right. The square had grown quiet. People were watching. Alexander dropped his voice. I didn't come here to argue. I came because I want to make things right. She looked at him for a long time. Then she placed her hand protectively over her belly, a soft, silent reminder that her world no longer revolved around him. You don't get to make things right with words, she said, stepping back. Not this time. If you want to be a father, you earn it. If you want forgiveness, you work for it. And with that, she turned away, walking back behind her flowers, back to her new life, leaving Alexander rooted in place. The petals fluttered in the breeze around him, 1,000 silent witnesses to a man who had everything and lost what mattered most. But he wasn't leaving. Not this time. Alexander returned the next morning. He didn't know why.